DHS is warning of a domestic terror on U.S. soil in reaction to Trump's strike on Iran. Breanna Morello will help us determine the difference between national security and deep state surveillance.
Wish we didn't have such a toxic relationship with the government, but we do.
The Iranian conflict is exposing the fault lines in MAGA. Our own Chris Bedford will give us his playbook to keep America first together.
There's one thing I learned this weekend. It's that everyone I know is a foreign policy expert, particularly on Iran, as it turns out.
And it's been over 1,000 days since FBI whistleblower Garret O'Boyle was suspended without pay. We'll have your best guesses on why Kash Patel isn't correcting the Bureau's past mistake.
There's two minds on this one. One is the deep state, and the other is trust the plan.
Blaze News, The Mandate starts right now. Good evening, Patriots. I'm Jill Savage, joined as always by Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson.
I feel like we're going to do it live tonight with no lines, just live.
Just keep going. That's what we're doing right now with our foreign policy as well. So Iran, we know they haven't launched a retaliatory strike on the American homeland since Trump decimated their nuclear facilities. But we know that White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt warned that the enemy may be lying in wait thanks to Joe Biden.
The previous administration allowed 20 million illegal aliens into our country. This administration is focused on the largest mass deportation of those illegal criminals, many of them who do come from countries in the Middle East. Many of those were known terrorists, and this administration is detaining and deporting them every day to protect our homeland and protect the American public.
Additionally, DHS has issued a national terrorism advisory bulletin of a possible retaliatory attack on U.S. soil. So here to break this down for us is Breanna Morello. She's the host of the Breanna Morello Show. So thanks so much for coming in today. So we look at this, and obviously this is the headlines that have been dominating all weekend. But we know that you have some pretty good sources, right? You break a lot of stories. So I want to ask you, is this DHS, is this an issue of good faith for their warning out on this, or is this a replay of what we've seen for the war on terror, the Patriot Act, et cetera?
Yeah. So as many of your audience members probably already know, the Biden regime allowed thousands of illegal aliens to just flood into our country from countries that hate us. And so the reality of it is yes, there is a threat there. And I've spoken to my sources who have, they've followed the terrorism threat throughout the FBI through their entire career. They've led divisions and they've led teams to dig into all of this. They have told me that a lot of these sleeper cell stories are badly sourced internally. So when they're telling us that there's a threat, that the sources are not very trustworthy is how he kind of phrased it. He does believe that there's a potential, obviously, of an Islamic terrorist attack, but he says there's a difference between that and whether they're a sleeper cell, which means that they've been trained by the government to come into our country and cause mass destruction. So that's something that he says that we should look out for. Now, I tend to disagree with that. I remember this video that was circulating online when an independent journalist confronted these group of Middle Eastern looking individuals, and the male came forward and said, "You're going to remember me." I think that shocked a lot of people on X, and we're still to this day wondering where that individual is because he sounded like that was a threat. So I think there's a lot to be nervous about. I think that there is potential for there to be a terrorist attack here on U.S. soil. When you let in that many unvetted individuals, you never know what you're going to get.
So this is something that really post 9/11 has astounded me, which is that if the threat was as great as we were told, and certainly I was expecting, it's astounding that we haven't had, right, the amount of terrorism that was predicted, in the last 20, 25 years. Because if you were around at that time, everyone thought this was the new wave. This is what the entire world was now going to face, right? Was terrorism in the U.S. And if you really wanted to do it, where there's a will, there's a way. How hard would it be to sneak in the United States of America, even before Biden was letting people in, right? Mm-hmm. There's Canada, the border there. So there's two lines of thought over the last couple of decades about this. One is, look, the reason that there isn't any terrorists is because we stopped them. And we were very successful at preventing it, throughout the world. And the other is maybe this threat wasn't as great as we thought, right? So I kind of think of that when I think of this issue now, where everyone's talking about sleeper cells, everyone's talking about potential retaliation. I mean, what is your sense of that? Because I think everyone would admit that what you just said is true. There could be sleeper cells all over this damn country because the Biden administration let all these people in. Yeah. On the other hand, is there the will and the organization? I guess that's sort of the question that I have.
Yeah, interesting enough, I don't think most Americans know, but the majority of those who came into our country and who were on terror watch lists actually wasn't from the southern border. In 2023, they came from the northern border. They came from Canada. And I think that's also something that we should be driving home at this point as well, because that's very critical. Now, the sleeper cell story, everyone keeps telling me that it's overplayed. And my source, retired FBI agent, was the one who was telling me that keep in mind that the FBI is saying that they're going to monitor individuals. Well, they're going to probably use this as an excuse to surveil the rest of us as well, because that's what they've done time and time again. So while we sit here and we watch them go back and forth and tell us that there is this threat here, why aren't we having ICE go pick up these people? Why isn't DHS getting involved? When the FBI is telling you that they're just going to monitor these individuals, that usually means it's some type of surveillance scheme.
Well, that's so concerning because we see with like our FBI whistleblower friends and stuff, and they, like Steve Friend goes out there online and he posts things of the FBI and, the FBI is going to take credit for this or that, when it was like local law enforcement that would go out and do this. And we all hope and pray that things are changing there at the FBI. But when you look at it, on the face of this, when we know that this level of threat is out there, and what they're doing is they're saying, we're going to watch this, right? And we've seen event after event take place on the U.S. homeland and, the Trump assassination attempts and whatnot. Well, oftentimes they say, we knew about these guys ahead of time. That's the problem. When you're only going to say we're going to surveil people when there are real threats that are facing the American citizens.
Yeah, the catch line is they were on our radar after every terror attack in this country, whether it's a mass shooting, for a domestic shooter who comes and is looking to cause destruction, or a foreigner. They always say that they were on the radar. So again, the FBI just looking for any excuse to surveil Americans, which they always do. And unfortunately, I don't think there's enough motive involved in here when it comes to getting the FBI to be more aggressive in crushing these things before they actually take place. Because unfortunately, even though there's new leadership within the FBI, I'd have to say that there still is that desire to capture more power over the American people, to take away and chip away at our freedoms, our privacy laws and everything. So a terror attack, although it's devastating, I don't want to say the FBI is aligned with it at all. They're not really doing much to prevent one at this point. And I know that that's going to be very controversial given the fact that we have new leadership in charge, but I haven't seen anything change.
So speaking of surveillance, let's talk about Tulsi Gabbard and the watch list. I mean, there's a couple of things to say here. I'm curious your thoughts about Tulsi within the administration. Mm-hmm. You could see the back and forth between people saying, she's out, and then the pictures of her in the room, right, that just came out yesterday, I believe. They were a little delayed, I think, pictures of Tulsi. But there's clearly a war going on within the administration over foreign policy. She's on one side of it, so we have that going on. But that's not what we're going to talk about first. Tulsi was on this TSA watch list, and he wrote a piece recently claiming that hundreds of Americans were unknowingly added to that list. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so hundreds, probably thousands of Americans were added to that list. I actually am suing TSA right now for the documents regarding the list. Unfortunately, they don't want to cough those up, of course. I was the one who called Tulsi Gabbard's team to let them know that she was added to a terror watch list as well. She kind of had an idea, but she didn't have the confirmation. I had the evidence that she needed. We're talking about the quiet skies list. Now, for those of you at home, if you ever had to go through additional security, if you have your boarding pass that I had 4 S's in the corner, whether it was the lower corner or the upper corner, that means you were on the list. Now, how did TSA do this? Well, according to my whistleblower, they were able to hire a private company to go out there to surveil your social media posts, and then they'd forward over to TSA. Now, TSA is obviously not an investigative agency, so they don't have the authority to go out there and dig into your background, but they were able to use this private company to go about doing just that. So it's deeply concerning, and I think Tulsi Gabbard getting into the administration is the reason why that's now been shut down. It cost American taxpayers $200 million a year to keep up. It started under Barack Obama. It's been going on for over a decade right now, and nobody wanted to shut it down. It was obviously unsuccessful because they've caught 0 terrorists as a result of all of this, which is obviously disgraceful. But again, Tulsi Gabbard played a major role in getting that shut down, and obviously President Trump as well.
I love that you're suing TSA. I wish that I could go out and sue TSA. I need something for them to do that. Now, if you've flown recently, you know that there's actually something new that they're doing with TSA, which they're putting the ID straight into the machine and they're doing facial recognition. But Breanna has like a helpful hint for people at home, because she was going out there on X and saying, absolutely not, I am not going to do this, probably because she's suing TSA and says, I don't want to participate in anything that you're doing. Tell people what they can do.
Yeah, you could reject it. So many people sit there and they just comply because they think it will be easier. The reality is it takes a couple of extra seconds just to preserve your privacy. So even if you've done it in the past, stop doing it now. When you go up to TSA or even customs, if you're an American citizen, you do not have to comply. That is for foreigners. That is not for American citizens. Don't hand them your driver's license. Don't put it in that little slot. Sit there and say, I want to decline the biometrics photo. If they tell you that you can't, tell them you know that they're lying, because they are. I could promise you that. So many times they've lied to me, told me that I can't decline it. You can decline it. I'm also suing TSA over that as well, because TSA hasn't gone about upholding, doing audits, doing anything like that. So we don't know who's getting those images. But what I can tell you is that DHS and TSA have both admitted to me, which they probably shouldn't have, that even though they claim that they delete those images, that TSA forwards it to DHS and then TSA deletes it. So little do you know that DHS is probably creating a database, although they say it's limited to me. They won't give me an exact number, so it could possibly be millions, thousands. We don't know, but DHS shouldn't be storing your biometrics at all.
I mean, the fact that we got used to that is one of the most insane things to me. If you had told someone, however many years it was before the naked machine, which doesn't even work, right? They found that out pretty quick afterwards, that people would allow this. No one would have believed it. And yet here we are. So anyway, we have to put that aside. We have to talk about something that's really important that's been all over, all over the news, all over the X, and that is the FBI whistleblowers. This is a tough one, because on the one hand we have Kash Patel and Bongino, just to lay this out, right, in power. They're owed some time to figure things out and to move the FBI in a different direction. And on the other hand, we have these whistleblowers who everyone at this table knows to some extent and has worked with some extent, and all of us have great respect for. And just for the audience, these are people who really did suffer career-wise for blowing the whistle at the craziness at the FBI over the last few years. So you've been a real vocal advocate, I think, for justice for them. What does that look like? What should happen?
Yeah, well, we're hoping that the FBI, if they're not going to reinstate either of them, which unfortunately Ed Martin came on my show, who's President Trump's pardon attorney, and he's running the weaponization division over at the DOJ. And he did say that they were going to come back to some capability, whether it's either at the FBI or within the DOJ. We didn't know at the time, but that's suddenly been shut down. So we're hoping that if they're going to shut it down at this point, Garret O'Boyle's owed money for 1,000 days. That's actually 1,001 day. He has been suspended from the Bureau. So he's still an employee. He's not being paid. We need him to reinstate his pay. If they want to investigate him for whatever reasons possible, that's fine, but at least pay the guy. He has children. Obviously, the FBI moved him to a new field office right before they did this to him. So they need to be compensated for their time. It's unrealistic for anyone at home to have a job and then to suddenly get pushed aside and told that you're going to be still employed. You're just not going to get paid to be employed. And then to expect these people to be able to keep up with that, it's just impossible. So we're hoping that they can have their pay reinstated, whatever back pay is due. And we're hoping that whatever blacklist they're on, because I know Steve Friend, again, just got rejected from a police chief position that he just recently applied for, was interviewing for. They are on a blacklist. They can't find jobs anywhere else. I mean, Steve Friend even applied for a gas station, and he wasn't even approved for one of those jobs either. So there's definitely a blacklist, unfortunately.
And this is a guy that's been described as, to me, as, the quintessential, like, old school Boy Scout FBI agent. I mean, it's just, it is absurd. So your main thing is, look, they all need jobs, or at least you got to pay them. And what's preventing that?
Unfortunately, I've been told, based on my sources, that Director Patel did step in and he did stop it, which is really disappointing because Patel, Garret O'Boyle, Steve Friend, they've all been friends prior to being sworn in. They were very close. They had group messages going back and forth between all of them, and they really were excited for Patel getting in, getting confirmed. I know I was as well. I endorsed him on social media. I was pushing for him daily. And so it's really unfortunate to hear that that's what's happening. Now, we don't know exactly why that all of a sudden changed. I know when I had Ed Martin on my show, I did reach out to people within Patel's office and other offices and thank them for bringing him back. I know I spoke to someone who works for a senator who was also heavily involved in all of this. So everyone was on the same page until that statement came out on my show. So it's unfortunate that this has had to happen. I really want it to be resolved because both of these guys have families to feed, and you can't feed a family with something like this going on.
Yeah, we played that clip on our show. I'm so thankful that you are out there and leading the way on this, because justice does need to come through for these people, because they went through and they told you, hey, things aren't right behind the scenes. They should not be punished under a Trump administration, under a Kash Patel-led FBI. This is wrong, and these people need to be made whole. Breanna, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
We'll talk about that a little bit more later in the show, but coming up next, we'll look at the conflict in Iran right after this. Well, ladies, listen up. I know you heard about Share the Arrows last year, so if you're considering to go for it, you know what? This is it. You should. It's happening on October 11th. It's going to be right here in Dallas. And of course, it's hosted by our own Allie Beth Stuckey from BlazeTV. And it's going to be a day that you won't forget, because this isn't just another women's conference. It's a powerful gathering of women who want to live boldly for Jesus and stand in the truth, even when the world is pushing back. And we see that happening a lot lately. So if you're feeling tired or burned out, or you just need a reset, this is your moment. Come be encouraged, challenged, and reminded exactly who God made you to be. Look for all the VIP spots. They're still available. Head to sharethearrows.com. That's sharethearrows.com for tickets and details. Earlier today, Iran launched missiles at American bases in Qatar and Iraq. So everybody's asking, is this the start of World War III, or is this just Iranian saber rattling? So here to give us his insight is Thibeau. He's an Army Ranger veteran and the director of the American Military Project. So Will, just walk us through what happened today and how it's actually going to affect Trump's objectives that we've seen so far.
Thanks, Jill. Iran knew they needed to respond in order to save face domestically, primarily, and to some extent on the international stage. But this was a domestic political face-saving move. You saw maybe a few dozen missiles, short to medium range missiles and rockets launch at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which was a huge hub of U.S. military activity in the Middle East. There's some reporting of rocket fire at bases in Iraq, but it was, by all accounts, a fairly modest effort to retaliate. And in fact, Iran themselves said, we fired the same number of missiles as you dropped and fired at us. We can only pray that this is exactly how President Trump drew it up in many ways. It's similar to their response after the killing of Qasem Soleimani when he was in Iraq targeting U.S. troops, where they launched missiles into the desert of a U.S. Airstrip in western Iraq. And this is, I think, a chance that peace is possible and even more realistic than any other eventuality. But I think it's worth noting that the future here it's a deal, it's negotiations, and it's diplomacy. That's clearly what it seems President Trump is signaling. He wants the violence to end, and now diplomacy takes shape, and we're going to get, in many ways, to where we started, which was a deal that is better than the Obama JCPOA and more enduring than the conflict we've seen the last 2 weeks.
Well, that's what interests me the most. I mean, let's talk about the best case scenario. So, if and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're telling me is, look, this response is the response. We've seen this song and dance before many times over decades with Iran, right? So we know, we can judge by the response that this is really a laydown. I mean, this is saying, okay, we're going to do this pro forma. We have to do something, and now we can go to the negotiating table. I mean, that's what you're telling me. And so if that happens, what's the best case here? What does that look like? How does that happen? What are the next steps?
President Trump wants a better deal than President Obama received when he signed it during his second term with the JCPOA. There are a few things to look for that I think would make for a better deal. There was evidence back in April that the Iranians were open to having U.S. inspectors at their nuclear facilities. Obviously, now there's a question of where those facilities would be, but it's significant that under the Trump deal, U.S. personnel, presumably State Department officials, would be able to inspect the Iranian nuclear program and give us that much more fidelity as opposed to just trusting foreigners at the IAEA. That's one thing. And I think President Trump also wants to see zero weapons grade enrichment, certainly below the 3.5% enrichment threshold that the Obama team received under the JCPOA. He wants no nuclear weapons program. If he can achieve American validation of no nuclear weapons program whatsoever, I think President Trump's going to sign that deal, and it's going to be something that is much more enduring, because the alternative is continued war. The alternative is regime change, because that's the only way to provide for the security of the region. Right now, their nuclear program is heading underground. So there has to be some means of sussing it out and finding out what's there, whether it's by force or diplomacy. And it looks like diplomacy may be the preferred option for all parties right now.
So let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because we've seen the threats now that Iran might close this. Of course, it's only like 2 miles wide. And everybody knows when you talk about the Middle East, it's all about oil and getting it out to the rest of the world. So this is a very important stretch there. So what happens, and lay it out for our audience, if this is actually closed for any length of time?
Jill, I think that's a pretty severe step. If the Iranian government were to functionally close the Strait of Hormuz. It's a huge traffic route for oil from the Middle East, not just Iran, but some of the other Gulf Arab states. Not much U.S. oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz at this time, but a lot goes through China. And it is a source of income for all the Gulf states, for both, obviously, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the others. So in many ways, closing the Strait of Hormuz would be suicidal for the Iranian regime. It would choke their economy. It would obviously raise the price of oil, but the traffic of Iranian supply to the rest of the world would stop. You do have to look at China, though. The Chinese have relied on oil from the Strait of Hormuz in the past, but they did just complete a railroad from China to Iran that obviously bypasses water, completely. And so it's a tricky situation. The Strait of Hormuz is really valuable, but Iran has to understand that once they close the Strait of Hormuz, they're making an enemy, more so than they already have, out of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, even to some extent. And that would be an extreme, I think that would be a sign that escalation is on the Ayatollah's mind. And that's something to which we really need to pay attention. But, I think if you look at the oil futures market today, it's looking optimistic. But again, we should be clear-eyed about what that threat is and what it would mean if Iran were to take the steps to restrict shipping activity through the Strait.
So one of the things I noticed this weekend, Will, is that there's a lot of experts in getting rid of nuclear sites on the internet. Apparently, most people are experts at this. But there is this looming question, right, about to what extent did we eradicate their nuclear program? And goes so far as to, some people say, well, what Trump did was pro forma. Let's just drop the bombs. We'll destroy some bad stuff. But now we can move on and sort of check the box. Now, I don't believe that that's what Trump himself wants to do. I know he actually wants to get rid of the nuclear program. But how do we know that we've really taken a toll on this and that it's safe, it's free and clear?
Matt, we can't be sure unless there are diplomatic or military means to find out what's there. In the Army, we had what's called a battle damage assessment. That's where you figure out what happened, how many people survived or didn't. If you got the guy you wanted on a mission, you always conducted a battle damage assessment. And oftentimes you wouldn't be able to do the best kind of BDA, as we called it, without some sort of boots on the ground. Maybe they can be civilian boots who are inspectors, or perhaps they have to be military boots, but you have to find some way to get boots on the ground. I imagine the Iranians, and there's some indication if you just listen to the statements of President Trump, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, and Secretary Rubio, that some semblance of the Iranian nuclear program remains. Now, whether they're able to replicate the robust facilities at Fordow, for example, I highly doubt that. I imagine that's probably known to Israeli and U.S. intelligence officials, but it's not a destroyed program. It still exists, and it's still a threat that we need to consider into the future. Maybe there's a 6-month, 1 year, or 3-year delay, but let's remember to 3 years ago, there was still an Iranian nuclear program about which we were worried. So the issue is not resolved. That's kind of my entire point about looking for what's next, is there has to be some mechanism of ensuring Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. And there are, as far as I see it, 2 ways to do it. The status quo is untenable because there's no way to see if they have a nuclear weapon or not. They've gone underground. There's still active hostilities with Israel. And so we need to push towards a resolution that gives us more visibility into their program.
So another question for you. While we have you here, I've noticed you've been doing media appearances, on this issue the last week or so. This is on the domestic side, this is a trying time for MAGA Maha, right? I mean, there's a lot of tension. I think this tension is normal and healthy in a large coalition, but there's a lot of tension when it comes to foreign policy. There's a lot on the line, and clearly at the extremes, right, there is disagreement. And the way I not so jokingly described it to my team early this morning was, on the one hand, I got, Groiper Hitler 666 anon account on Twitter saying MAGA is over and, Trump is a Jew, and then on the other hand, I got Lindsey Graham, wargasming, and happy that we're taking action. It seems to me there's a lot of space in the middle, which is probably where most people are. But nonetheless, this is serious stuff as we try to hash out an American foreign policy that makes sense for the 21st century. You can sense the tension within the administration. You can sense the tension in the audience and among the commentariat. What are your thoughts about this?
It's obviously a great observation, Matt. I do think the tension is real, and I think also the risk to the coalition is still real. If we proceed with the understanding that we're devoting bandwidth, resources, and hardware, military hardware to the Middle East, I think that's in tension with what many people expected from a second Trump term. Now, both sides, both extremes, as you identify, have some recompense with what the status quo will actually be. It's clear that the Trump administration does not seek a path to regime change. I don't think that we're going to play an explicit active role in overthrowing the Ayatollah anytime soon, if today's activities are any indication. And there are a lot of people who are angling for that. And similarly, we are clearly not operating with a leader who sees pacifism or the absence of U.S. activity in different regions throughout the world as his goal. If President Trump seeks or sees it as necessary to act, he is going to act, even if it means dropping bombs on nuclear sites. And that's something with which we should live. But I think what we need to understand as a movement and as an administration going forward is how we will allocate bandwidth in the future. If it's true that the People's Republic of China is the pacing threat for the U.S. military and economically, then we need to allocate bandwidth accordingly. We used probably over half of our supply of bunker busters in this attack, which is significant. Those don't get rebuilt over the course of a long weekend. The 30 plus aircraft that were involved in the strike of 3 facilities is an indication of just how precious resources are for the military. And we need to be really dutiful about how we allocate those resources going forward. So that's where I want this healthy discussion, as you say, to move towards, because these are the real kinds of trade-offs that will become a lot harder and more acute in 2026 and 2027. Perhaps we can manage it in 2025. I believe the administration can, but that doesn't mean it won't be a real trade-off for the rest of the term.
That is very well said. We will have to end it on that note. Will Thibeau, thanks so much.
Thanks to you both.
Don't go anywhere. It's Bedford time. Chris Bedford coming up right after this. Oh, it's spicy. The Republicans are facing a takedown from within over a Medicaid shell game that boasts federal payouts at the expense of taxpayers. Now, it's a rare fight that pits the establishment tax cutters against the populist insurgents in a battle to see who's really standing up for the working class. D.C. correspondent Chris Bedford is going to break it all down for us. So, Chris, when we look at this fight right now, I don't know that a lot of people know that there's a Medicaid game that's going on behind the scenes right now in Congress. So break this down for us.
Exactly. And it's not the simplest of all these different things. It's not as straightforward. So states have these taxes they put on providers for healthcare services, and they use those taxes to take a little bit of money back from the provider, the hospital, and then send that money to the federal government, because as part of Medicaid's breakdown, they are supposed to pay half of all of their Medicaid expenses, and the federal government picks up the other half. Now, basically every state actually, south of Alaska, has some kind of system where they'll put a 6% maybe or tax on the Medicaid, and then the hospital will act like, hey, everything costs a little bit more here. They build the tax in. They send it back to the federal government for their reimbursement through the state and this and that. It's a bit complicated, but the end result is the states have finagled a way to pay less percent, maybe 47%, 46% of Medicaid. Now, on its face, this is an obvious shell game. It's an obvious sort of scheme that doesn't sound like something that conservatives would like, and a lot of the traditional tax cut, break it down conservatives are totally against anything like this, and they want to restrict it. But the reality of the matter is that in a lot of these different states where rural hospitals have been declining for 20 years, and where rural hospitals have been particularly impacted by the increase in Obamacare, they've been going out at a much higher rate and going out of business at a much higher rate than any of the major suburban or urban hospitals. They have a smaller profit margin. They cater to older people. They cater to poorer people. They have less beds. They just turn less of a profit. And they're clinging on by a lifeline. And the difficulty for Republicans, and especially some of the more populist Republicans like Josh Hawley, is, well, their states end up having a lot of folks who really do rely on the services of these rural hospitals. They can't survive it, even though they may take a smaller cut of this whole shell game from what the city and suburban hospitals do. They're essential. So now you've got a fight going on between the populists who say, well, I thought we were here to help the working class. I thought we were here to help the country people. I thought we were here to help our voters. And those guys who are saying, well, traditional Republican economics is you got to put an end to this. I think the long and the short of this is it's going to end up in the final bill having a Medicaid, a stabilization fund to help rural hospitals and stop their closures, to stop situations like you have in the eastern shore of Maryland. If you look at a map, it's pretty big. It has not a single hospital on it, where if you get in trouble, you get sick, you have a serious injury, you're leaving by helicopter, or your family or an ambulance is driving as fast as it can to Baltimore or Washington, D.C. through all that traffic. It's a dangerous situation for a lot of parts of the country, made possible by Obamacare and other government meddling. But this might actually provide an opportunity for the House and Senate to provide an actual fix to this, as opposed to simply allowing this tax scheme to go on.
Well, Chris, as we are all well aware, the Republicans aren't just divided on Medicare. Trump's strike on Iranian nuclear facilities has opened up a Pandora's box of foreign policy differences on the right. We've been dealing with it, for the last few days. This extends from the administration itself, from the heart of the administration itself. This tension, I think, all the way out to people in the heartland, and it's a very interesting time when it comes to foreign policy. Now, I think this is a time to forge a foreign policy of the future, of the 21st century. But you can see a lot of push and pull going on right now. So what should Trump do to restore unity here? How do you see the division?
Well, I think the quickest thing he can do to restore unity is to end this and declare victory and actually have results to show for it. Now, a huge aspect of that is going to be whether or not the reactors were actually destroyed, whether or not there's more spent uranium flying around. But even if there is, even if that's, I think it's estimated that about 10 vehicles worth of uranium would be in Iranian hands, potentially, if it wasn't buried. The Israelis should be able to pick that off. And then there's a question of whether or not the Iranians have another plant where they've been manufacturing this, another bunker sort of situation, which is what they claim, but it's difficult to verify. Everyone's got an off-ramp here. The United States hit the Iranians hard over the weekend. And by the way, I owe our viewers like a total mea culpa because I didn't think that this was going to happen. And I remember thinking, man, I should opine more often on North Korean policy because no one can ever fact check you when you're a North Korea expert. You can just say, I think Kim Jong-un fed his aunt to chickens and made the kids watch. And people just can't tell. And that sounds right. The satellite imagery suggests that's what happened. But with this one, it was pretty quickly shown to be, no, this strike was coming. The president was going to do it. That 2-week window was a bit of a ruse, maybe to let people feel more comfortable. But everyone went through the steps here. The president warned the Iranians that he was coming. So it wasn't just a mass casualty event for them. It hit their facilities, which is what the Americans were necessary to do. The Israelis can take care of the rest. It was potentially successful. Got back, and then Iran called and said, well, I mean, obviously we have to do something about this. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard is going to overthrow this regime and become more hardline if we don't do something about it. And by the way, that's still always a danger. So they lashed out at some American bases like they did previously when Soleimani was killed by the president. And lashed out, not Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's foreign terrorism operations. Lashed out. God, everyone felt good, like kind of like children a little bit. They felt like they'd gotten their way. And now they're going to go back to talking about peace. The difficulty, of course, for the president here is Benjamin Netanyahu has devoted much of his life to getting rid of these Iranians, to solving these threats. He's now effectively defeated Hamas. He's neutered Hezbollah. The Syrian regime, which is part of that Shia crescent, has collapsed and fled to Russia. Iran is the last one, and I don't see him wanting to pull back right now. That doesn't necessarily involve the United States at this point. It doesn't have to be our war, and that's the sort of thing that all of this could end up blowing over if it really was just a quick, concentrated American strike that was not aimed at killing people, was aimed at degrading dangerous capabilities, and then everything is over. That little rebellion that's kind of forming, especially outside of Congress and more on the MAGA side of things and the internet and across populism and some of the thinkers, will never actually get off the ground. And some of the people who said this won't be World War III, it'll be fine, will be proven correct in this situation. However, of course, a lot of those same people who said, relax, this is different, really do secretly want regime change. And if the Israelis and the neoconservatives in the United States and the more anti-Iran hawks in the United States are able to push the president towards regime change, then we're just seeing the beginning of this.
There's going to be plenty to talk about here on the show for the next, I would say, days, but I feel like this is going to be even longer than that potentially. But give the people what they really want to know. They don't even know this happened. But Chris Bedford, we're so lucky to have you here today because today was a big moving day. It's all the DC Blaze offices, but how are they? I'm very curious. I need to know. And our audience might as well know as well.
Oh, it's an upgrade. It's wonderful. We have 3 offices now as opposed to 1 office in a hallway. We might even set up a desk for you visitors to be able to use. It's right next. It's not too far from where we are right now in the studios. It'll be great. Today, moving in what, with humidity, the weatherman says feels like 110 degrees. Well, that was less than fun. And if you were to see me half an hour ago, I was not ready for TV whatsoever. I was actually over here in the studio. So people said when I walked in, you don't look like the same person. And I took advantage of the fantastic facilities available in Blaze News' new offices to get ready and to come to you. But I'm going to be visiting Dallas shortly, too, so I can't wait to see you Wednesday.
You're ready for the heat. You're prepared. Washington, D.C. is doing its best to prepare you. But anytime we see Chris Bedford without a tie, people go, who is that guy? What's going on? People in D.C. know you as somebody who wears a tie day in and day out. So you knew something was going on today.
Something was definitely going on. My general philosophy is that men do wear ties, but maybe today I'll button the top button. We can go with the Ahmadinejad as a little hat tip to our friends in Persia.
Well, we have to congratulate Rebecca too. She has an actual office now, right?
I know she's getting spoiled, but there's sunlights over it. So I told her I could control that because only closers. Only closers get sunlight.
Yes.
Bedford, you got to keep the structure in place. It's fine. Keep everything going on in D.C. and we'll see you back out here in Dallas in just a couple days.
Can't wait.
All right, don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll talk about the FBI whistleblowers. There is so much going on behind the scenes. We want to get your take on it next. Well, promises made, promises kept. We've heard this slogan over time with the Trump administration. However, an FBI whistleblower who exposed corruption during the Biden era remains suspended without back pay. So I asked you on X because it's been over 1,000 days since Garret O'Boyle's indefinite unpaid suspension. Do you give the FBI under Kash and Bongino the benefit of the doubt, or do you think that they aren't moving fast enough? Well, Garret O'Boyle replied himself for our first response and says, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm not sure how I do anymore. Actions speak louder than words, yet my paycheck is still all zeros. My attorneys at Empowerment Oversight submitted a damning appeal to them back in March, yet it's June and still no remedy. Many people have said things like, hey, they have more important things to do. As someone who has gone over 1,000 days without a paycheck, that's just another excuse. This could be fixed in less than a day, not moving fast enough. So that's the way that we look at this one for Garret O'Boyle himself.
Yeah, well, I mean, you feel for him, right? I mean, here's someone who obviously has been through it, who was a whistleblower, and he doesn't have a job. These are people who really lost something because they came out. Now, in his case, there's some behind-the-scenes talk of some investigation of some stuff, not crazy stuff, but some other stuff that would need to be investigated about him going back. I mean, but it doesn't matter. It's like, good, do that. Breanna Morello said that today. Whatever's going on, do whatever you need to do with him, but reinstate him. Like, give him his money. And I think there's a lot of things they're doing, but in terms of importance, at least doing this for one of these guys would be a symbolic gesture that I think increasingly, is making people pissed off for good reason, and it needs to be made.
And Johnny replies that he says it's not moving fast enough at all. I appreciate all of the arrests of the sex traffickers and drug dealers, but the announcements of these arrests feel like low-hanging fruit to appease supporters and show us that they are actually keeping us safe. So I feel like a lot of people are saying that, okay, like, we do thank you for the work that you are doing right now at the FBI, because I do believe that they're trying. But they could move a little bit faster on certain other ththings, such as this. Yeah, I mean, it's like, look, they're going after bad guys again. That's great. But again, whatever the deal is, every time when it comes to Boyle and each of the others, all I hear is excuses. I have to say, like, well, this is complicated and this person, blah, blah, blah. And I get that. Life is complicated. But not a single one of them, people you were talking with beforehand, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give Kash, Patel, and Bongino the benefit of the doubt all day long. But this is becoming concerning. Yeah, primordial ordered repair says that Patel and Bongino deserve the benefit of the doubt. People need to remember how incredibly messed up that entire agency is and how much work they are doing. They must be working 18 hours a day on all sorts of stuff. The rot was really beyond imagination. And I think that is, it's fair. The rot in the FBI, the rot in the deep state, they are dealing with a ton of stuff. Yeah, that's why, of course, they're going to say, look, this guy has a character problem, or this guy has a problem over here, and he wasn't a saint, and he was. Of course they're going to do that, because they've had years to smear these people. So whatever the truth is, the reality that we know right in front of our faces is that these people were whistleblowers. They went out and they blew the whistle. They got in trouble for it. And we need to set a precedent of those people being rewarded and encouraged if we really want to have, an FBI that cares about truth and justice. So, at least one of these people, let's respond to, because you should be, again, ton of other things they have to do. They're really important. But you want to make sure that you change the culture at the FBI, which seems almost impossible. It's so bad. And the way you're going to have to do that is not by punishing all these whistleblowers and just letting them hang out to dry. No, and we've seen the splits in maga, as we were talking earlier on the show. There's so much going on right now. I want to use the time that we have left to talk about just not only just the Iranian conflict, but just foreign policy as a whole, because it set Twitter at X ablaze this weekend. There were so many thoughts going down on social media this weekend.
Yeah, and those thoughts reflect, as I think Will Thibeau said earlier, agreeing with me, right? Those thoughts reflect reality. So Twitter is actually a great, it's a great instrument, is sort of in extreme to see the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is that people on the right disagree about foreign policy. So you have older people much more comfortable in general with intervention. A lot more than younger people. You have younger people watching this right now. A lot of the Zoomers, you have no idea how they're radicalized by this. I mean, multiple kids, like 18 years old, between like 18 and 22, I've talked to this weekend. All the guys, I don't want to die for this war. What are we dying for? Are we dying for Israel, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff they'll say. They're in a totally different situation than a lot of older people who say, hey, it's about time we took care of Iran's nuclear, program. We don't want that to exist. So there's a lot of debate on the right about foreign policy. And I think ultimately, this is a good thing because ultimately we do need a new foreign policy for the 21st century. We're never going to be as the most powerful nation on earth. It's unrealistic and it's kind of crazy and stupid to say we're just going to be non-interventionists all the time. We're going to intervene when we have that, because we have that power, because we are the hegemon, because we are by far the most powerful nation on earth. So there's going to be conflict, there's going to be intervention, right? But we do not want neoconism. We do not want to, on that extreme, go and regime change the rest of the world. That's insane and psychotic. Then the other extreme, you have the people who are just going to stay home. We're not going to do either of those things. So what do we do? How do you build a new foreign policy? Well, here's the dirty little secret, regardless of what intellectuals do or say or people on Twitter argue, even though those things are more important than many people want to admit. The president makes the foreign policy. So if Trump consistently makes prudential decisions in the moment, by deciding in the moment what the right thing to do is, addressing reality in a way that works, a new foreign policy will come out of that. And that will need to be explained to people. People will give it a name, but it will be something new, and it will come from Trump actively just addressing each situation as it comes up. And that's why I'm optimistic about the future.
Matthew, how do people just stay sane right now, right? There's going to be chaos in the news. We're going to see things changing day in and day out, whether we do what they want or we do the exact opposite thing. How do people stay sane right now?
I think you first off, you have to work on yourself above everything else. I mean, you have to look directly into what your biggest problems are and address them head on. And then there's not literally time of day to worry about some of these things, because there's plenty we need to work on ourselves. Make yourself better and you'll forget about the rest. You'll feel better about yourself. But when it comes to what's going on, remember, we are still the world's largest power. And this government is way more stable sometimes than, the commentators would have you believe. So everything's going to be fine. No panicins.
I think that's the message right there. No panicins. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. One more day at least. We'll be back here actually for one more day for sure. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Nothing beyond that. It's guaranteed though, Peterson. Life.